My name is Isabel Bennett. I'm 32 years old, and I trusted someone from my own family with something that nearly cost me everything. You won't believe what happened when a small mistake turned into a financial nightmare that nobody wanted to take responsibility for, except me. What I discovered that day changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty, and the way I handled it shocked everyone, including myself. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you've ever been the one who always fixes everyone else's problems while your own get ignored, hit that subscribe button right now because this story is going to resonate with you on a deep level. I grew up in a typical middle-class family in Ohio. My parents, Richard and Linda, my younger brother Ethan, and me. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable, and I was raised to believe that family meant unconditional support, no questions asked. That belief became my biggest weakness, and it almost destroyed the life I'd spent a decade building from nothing. The moment everything fell apart started so innocently that I didn't even see it coming. Ethan called me on a Tuesday afternoon, his voice casual and light, asking if he could use my name as a reference for something small and temporary. He said it was no big deal, just a formality, and that he'd handle everything himself. I said yes without thinking twice because that's what you do for family, right? Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would force me to choose between protecting myself and protecting the person who betrayed my trust. I trusted someone from my own family, and that trust almost left me bankrupt, homeless, and legally responsible for debts I never created. Nobody screamed, nobody apologized, nobody even acknowledged what they'd done at first. If this resonates with you, drop a like and subscribe, because what I'm about to share will change how you think about family boundaries forever. But that small mistake Ethan mentioned wasn't small at all, and the bill that arrived 3 months later made my hands shake so violently I could barely hold the envelope. The number on that collections notice was staggering: $23,000 in unpaid credit card debt, all linked directly to my name and social security number. My heart dropped into my stomach as I read through the details, seeing charges for electronics, luxury items, and cash advances I never authorized. I called Ethan immediately, my voice trembling with confusion and rising panic, asking him what the hell was going on. His response was casual, almost dismissive. "Oh yeah, I meant to tell you about that. I needed to build my credit, so I opened a card using your info as a cosigner. Don't worry, I'll pay it back." "Don't worry," he said, as if those 3 words could erase the fact that my credit score had plummeted. My savings were at risk, and my entire financial future hung in the balance because of his oversight. I felt my blood pressure spike as the reality set in. This wasn't just irresponsible, it was illegal. But what hurt more than the money, more than the betrayal, was the way he said it, like I was overreacting to something trivial. That moment, sitting alone in my apartment with that notice in my hands, I realized something terrifying. The people who hurt you the most are often the ones who convince you that your pain doesn't matter. I grew up believing that family meant automatic protection, that blood ties created an unbreakable safety net where everyone looked out for each other no matter what. My parents always preached unity above everything else. Richard would say, "Bennetts stick together" at every family dinner, and Linda would remind us that forgiveness was the glue that held families intact. I internalized those lessons so deeply that I became the person everyone leaned on, the reliable one, the fixer who never asked for help, because asking felt like admitting weakness. But I discovered the hard way that sometimes family doesn't mean protection at all. It means negligence wrapped in the comfortable disguise of intimacy and unconditional love. The people closest to you know exactly which boundaries you'll let them cross because you've been conditioned to believe that holding them accountable somehow makes you the bad guy. For years, I watched Ethan make careless decisions, dropping out of college twice, losing jobs because he overslept, borrowing money from our parents that he never paid back, and everyone just shrugged it off as Ethan being Ethan. Nobody held him responsible because I was always there to smooth things over, to be the buffer between his chaos and real consequences. That's when everything shifted for me, sitting in my living room with that collections notice, realizing I'd spent 3 decades enabling a system that protected everyone except me. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come, stopped hoping someone would finally see how much weight I'd been carrying alone. Instead, I made a decision that terrified me but felt absolutely necessary. I would stop asking for care and consideration, and I would start demanding accountability. What happened next changed not just my relationship with my family, but my entire understanding of what it means to protect yourself when the people who should protect you simply won't. My brother Ethan had always been treated like the one who messes up, but never on purpose. And that excuse became his shield against any real responsibility. From childhood, the narrative was crystal clear. Isabel was the organized one, the achiever, the daughter who got straight A's and scholarships, while Ethan was the free spirit who needed extra grace and understanding. If you've ever been the responsible sibling who watches the other one get away with everything, hit subscribe and leave a like because you know exactly what I'm talking about. Our parents would sigh affectionately when Ethan forgot important commitments or made impulsive decisions, treating his chaos like endearing quirks rather than patterns that needed addressing. I became the one who held everything together, the emotional scaffolding that kept our family dynamic from collapsing under the weight of Ethan's constant crises. When he wrecked his car at 19, I helped him negotiate with the insurance company and drove him to work for 3 months. When he got evicted at 24, I co-signed a new lease and even helped him move his stuff in the middle of a snowstorm. Every time something went wrong in Ethan's life, I showed up with solutions, never asking what he'd learned from the last disaster, never questioning why I was always the one fixing problems I didn't create. This dynamic seemed normal to me for the longest time. It was just how our family operated, an unspoken agreement that Isabel handled things and Ethan got handled. But normal doesn't mean healthy, and familiar doesn't mean right. Looking back now, I can see how that imbalance was carefully constructed over decades, with every rescue mission reinforcing the idea that Ethan's mistakes weren't really his to solve. I'd become so accustomed to being the safety net that I never stopped to ask the most important question: what happens when the safety net needs catching? The answer, I was about to learn, was absolutely nothing. The so-called small mistake that changed everything started with one casual decision Ethan made without even bothering to tell me. He didn't just use my name as a reference like he claimed. He used my full information to open a joint credit account, and then treated that card like free money. Before I go deeper, if this is already making your stomach twist because you've seen something similar, subscribe and leave a like so you don't miss how this all unravels and what I did to protect myself. What he framed as a minor favor was actually a ticking bomb with my name printed all over it. It wasn't an unpredictable accident. It was repeated carelessness dressed up as innocence. The charges on that card went back months. Late-night food deliveries, concert tickets, weekend trips, and large cash withdrawals that had no explanation at all. As I scanned the statements, my chest tightened and my palms grew sweaty. Every line felt like a fresh betrayal. Another reminder that he had gambled with my future as if it were a game. The worst part was realizing that while I'd been budgeting carefully, saying no to small luxuries so I could save for a down payment on a house, Ethan had been spending recklessly on things I'd never even allowed myself to buy. When I realized the real impact, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. My vision blurred, and it felt like the room was tilting while I struggled to take a full breath. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears as I sat on the floor, papers scattered around me like debris after an explosion. I wasn't just scared. I was humiliated, because I had handed him the weapon he used to blow up my financial stability. In that moment, one thought kept echoing in my head. This wasn't a mistake I could just fix and forget. This one had a cost that wouldn't quietly disappear. When I finally gathered the courage to bring everything to my parents, I went in expecting shock, anger, maybe even a fierce defense of me after seeing the numbers. Instead, what I got was a wave of minimization so powerful it almost made me doubt my own reality. If you've ever tried to explain your pain and been told you're making a big deal out of nothing, hit that subscribe button and leave a like, because you know how deeply that cuts. I sat at their dining table, laying out the statements and the collection notice, my voice shaking as I walked them through each charge. My mom, Linda, pressed her lips together and sighed, her first words being, "Isabel, you're overreacting. It's just money. Ethan will sort it out." My dad, Richard, glanced at the papers, then at me and said, "You know your brother. He doesn't think things through. but he never means harm. They asked me to calm down, to lower my voice, and to remember that family comes first. Not once did either of them ask how this would affect my credit, my plans, or my emotional state. Their priority was keeping the peace, not facing the damage. Then came the familiar requests that sounded gentle but felt like commands wrapped in guilt. "Don't make this bigger than it is," my mom said, placing a hand over mine, as if touch could erase the fear clawing at my chest. "We'll talk to him, but there's no need to involve anyone else or make this into some huge drama." Silence, patience, understanding. That's what they wanted from me. Nobody asked how many years of work it took to build my financial stability, or how many sleepless nights I'd have wondering if this would cost me the home I'd been saving for. Sitting there, watching them rush to protect Ethan from consequences while asking me to swallow mine, I felt something inside me quietly snap. In that moment, sitting at my parents' dining table surrounded by people who should have protected me but chose comfort over justice, I understood something devastatingly simple and cruel. The people who minimize the damage are never the ones paying the price. They're spectators asking you to bleed quietly so they don't have to witness the mess. If this hits deep, make sure you subscribe and drop a like, because what I'm about to share is the turning point that changed everything for me. I looked at my mom's sympathetic face, my dad's dismissive shrug, and realized they weren't seeing my pain. They were seeing an inconvenience to their family narrative. I replayed every time I'd been the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who absorbed everyone else's chaos without complaint. And suddenly it all looked different through this new lens. Every rescue mission for Ethan had sent the same message. His mistakes don't have real consequences because Isabel will always catch him. My parents had built an entire system around protecting him from accountability, and I'd been the foundation holding that system upright. The weight of that realization hit me so hard I had to excuse myself from the table, my legs unsteady as I walked to the bathroom and gripped the sink, staring at my reflection. That's when I made a promise to myself that felt terrifying and liberating all at once. I wasn't going to pay for his mistakes anymore, not financially, not emotionally, not in any way. I would no longer be the shock absorber between Ethan and reality, no longer the person who made his problems disappear so everyone else could stay comfortable. Walking back into that dining room, I felt different, not angry, not even sad, just crystalline, clear about what needed to happen next. I wasn't going to argue, plead, or beg them to understand. I was going to document everything and let the truth speak louder than any family loyalty ever could. I didn't confront Ethan with tears or accusations after that dinner. I didn't call a family meeting or demand an apology that would never feel genuine anyway. Instead, I went home, opened my laptop, and started building something far more powerful than an emotional argument. A comprehensive record of every single thing that had happened. Subscribe now if you want to see how preparation and documentation became my greatest weapons, and leave a like if you believe actions should have real consequences. I created a detailed spreadsheet with dates, amounts, correspondence, and every conversation I could verify through text messages and emails. I began pulling credit reports, printing bank statements, and organizing everything into a timeline that showed exactly when each fraudulent charge occurred and how long Ethan had hidden it from me. My hands moved methodically across the keyboard, transforming rage and betrayal into rows and columns, turning chaos into clarity. There was something deeply satisfying about this process. It felt like taking back control, like refusing to let emotion cloud the undeniable facts. Every document I gathered was another piece of armor, another layer of protection against anyone who might try to tell me I was exaggerating or being dramatic. This wasn't about revenge. It was about creating an undeniable record that couldn't be dismissed, minimized, or explained away with excuses. I documented phone calls with the credit card company, recorded dates when I'd tried to discuss the issue with Ethan and been brushed off, even saved screenshots of his social media posts showing purchases he'd made with money he clearly didn't have. I turned my pain into proof, my frustration into facts, and my vulnerability into an unshakable foundation. The more I documented, the clearer everything became. This wasn't a family misunderstanding, this was fraud, and I had every right to protect myself, even if that meant making people uncomfortable. A house doesn't collapse because of one small crack in the foundation. It falls when everyone notices the damage, but nobody takes responsibility for the repair. That's exactly what was happening in my family. Everyone saw the cracks forming from Ethan's behavior, but they kept painting over them with excuses, hoping the structure would somehow hold on its own. If you've ever felt like the only person willing to address the real problems while everyone else pretends everything's fine, hit subscribe and leave a like because this analogy is going to resonate deeply. I thought about this metaphor constantly as I organized my documents, realizing I'd spent years being the emergency patch, the quick fix that kept everything standing. But I was done being the emotional spackle that covered up structural problems without ever addressing the root cause. Every time I'd bailed Ethan out, lent him money, or smoothed over his mistakes with our parents, I was just painting over another crack while the foundation continued to weaken. The house looked fine from the outside. Our family photos on social media, our holiday gatherings, our carefully maintained appearance of unity. But underneath, the whole thing was compromised. I could finally see that my role had never been about love or support. It had been about preservation, about keeping up appearances so nobody had to face uncomfortable truths. So I made a conscious decision to stop being the repair crew for damage I didn't cause. I stopped answering Ethan's calls asking for favors, stopped mediating between him and our parents when he needed something, stopped pretending that ignoring structural problems was the same as family loyalty. It felt strange at first, almost unnatural, like I was abandoning a post I'd held my entire life. But there was also relief, a lightness that came from setting down a burden I should never have been carrying alone. The house would either learn to stand without me as its foundation, or it would finally reveal just how fragile it had always been. Every single financial loss turned into a line item in my spreadsheet. Every risk to my future became a calculated figure with documentation attached. This wasn't about punishing Ethan. It was about revealing the true cost of carelessness, about making visible what everyone had worked so hard to keep hidden. If you believe that accountability matters more than keeping the peace, subscribe right now and leave a like, because what comes next shows exactly why documentation is power. I spent weeks gathering evidence, cross-referencing statements, and building an ironclad case that showed not just what happened, but the pattern of behavior that led to this moment. I contacted the credit card company and formally disputed the charges, providing proof that I never authorized the account and that my information had been used without my knowledge or consent. I filed a police report for identity theft, my hands trembling as I signed the paperwork because I knew this action would cross a line my family could never forgive. But the truth was undeniable. What Ethan did wasn't a family squabble or a misunderstanding. It was fraud, plain and simple, and treating it as anything less would mean accepting financial ruin to protect his feelings. Each step I took felt heavier than the last, but also more necessary, like I was finally building walls where there should have been boundaries all along. The process of transforming my pain into measurable proof changed something fundamental inside me. Numbers don't lie, dates don't manipulate, and bank statements don't gaslight you into questioning your own reality. I created a full impact report showing how this affected my credit score, my ability to qualify for a mortgage, and even my monthly budget as I scrambled to make minimum payments on debt I never created. When everything was compiled, 37 pages of documentation, screenshots, official statements, and a detailed timeline, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. Not over Ethan, not over my parents, but over my own story and my right to tell it exactly as it happened. When I finally presented the full cost breakdown to my family, the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way I'd never experienced before. I didn't yell, didn't cry, didn't make dramatic accusations. I simply laid out 37 pages of documented evidence on the dining table and let the numbers speak for themselves. The silence that followed wasn't the comfortable silence of avoidance they were used to. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of people confronting undeniable truth for the first time. My parents stared at the papers, their faces pale, while Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unable to meet my eyes. I walked them through each section methodically, my voice steady and clinical, pointing out the exact date each fraudulent charge appeared, the accumulated interest, the late fees, and the damage to my credit score expressed in actual point drops. "This isn't about intentions anymore," I said, tapping the page showing my rejected mortgage pre-approval. "This is about impact, and impact is measurable." I showed them the emails I'd sent Ethan asking for explanations, the texts he'd ignored, the calls he'd never returned. Every excuse they'd used to defend him. "He didn't mean it. He'll fix it. He just needs time," crumbled against the timeline showing 6 months of deliberate avoidance. Then I presented the final calculation, the total financial impact including debt, credit repair costs, lost opportunities, and legal fees if I chose to pursue full restitution. The number was staggering, and watching their faces as they processed it felt like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion. For the first time in my entire life, nobody rushed to defend Ethan or minimize what he'd done. The truth, laid bare in black and white, was too overwhelming to debate, too concrete to dismiss. They weren't confronting my emotions anymore. They were confronting facts, and facts don't negotiate or accept apologies as payment. The reactions around that table were more complex than I'd anticipated, a mixture of shock, discomfort, and something that looked almost like betrayal, but directed at me, not Ethan. My mother's hands trembled as she pushed the papers away, her voice tight when she said, "I can't believe you documented all of this like he's a criminal." My father sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw clenched in a way that told me he felt ambushed rather than enlightened. Ethan himself looked genuinely stunned, as if seeing his actions quantified and organized had somehow made them real in a way they hadn't been before. But underneath the discomfort, I saw something else emerging, something I'd never received from them before: respect. It wasn't warm or affectionate. It was the cold, cautious respect you give someone when you realize they're not going to back down, that they've come prepared, and you have no defense. My dad cleared his throat and asked in a voice much quieter than usual, "What exactly are you planning to do with all this?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implication, because we all knew what this meant: evidence that could be used legally, officially, in ways that would have consequences far beyond our family dinners. I let the question sit for a moment before responding, maintaining eye contact with each of them. "That depends entirely on whether Ethan takes full responsibility, financial responsibility, for what he did." The shift in power was palpable. I was no longer the accommodating sister begging for acknowledgement. They finally understood that I wasn't asking for their permission or approval. I was informing them of reality. They hadn't respected my emotions or my boundaries, but they respected my documentation, my preparation, and my willingness to follow through. It wasn't the understanding I'd hoped for, but it was something far more valuable. They finally saw me as someone with leverage, someone who couldn't be dismissed or talked down anymore. The transformation in how my family treated me after that meeting was swift and undeniable, like someone had flipped a switch in their perception of who I was. Within days, I went from being dramatic Isabel who's making everything difficult to someone whose boundaries suddenly became non-negotiable and whose words carried actual weight. My phone stopped ringing with guilt-laden calls from my mother asking me to just let it go, and Ethan stopped sending casual texts pretending nothing serious had happened. The silence was different now, not dismissive, but careful, almost fearful, like they were finally recognizing that actions have consequences, and I was the one holding the receipt. I'd gone from invisible, the person whose pain could be overlooked because I'd always eventually forgive, to incontournable, a force they had to acknowledge and navigate around. My parents started asking permission before sharing family news with me, their voices tentative in a way they'd never been before. Ethan actually showed up at my apartment with a written payment plan, his hands shaking as he handed it to me, mumbling something about talking to a financial advisor. It was surreal watching people who'd spent decades ignoring my needs suddenly treat my decisions like law, but I understood what had changed. I'd stopped asking for respect and started commanding it through sheer preparation and unwillingness to absorb their chaos anymore. Without raising my voice even once, without dramatic confrontations or emotional breakdowns, I had completely redefined my position in the family hierarchy. I wasn't the fixer anymore, the safety net, the one who sacrificed herself so everyone else could stay comfortable. I was the boundary keeper, the one who documented everything and followed through on consequences. The crazy part was that I'd gained more authority through silence and strategy than I ever could have through years of explaining, pleading, or trying to make them understand my feelings. They didn't need to understand me anymore. They just needed to respect that I meant what I said, and that respect, cold as it was, changed everything. The hardest lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about Ethan's betrayal or my parents' enabling. It was about the language that negligent people finally understand. For years, I'd spoken in emotions, in explanations, in appeals to their conscience and sense of fairness, and none of it had ever penetrated. But the moment I started speaking in documented facts, legal implications, and quantifiable consequences, suddenly they heard every single word crystal clear. Responsibility, I discovered, isn't just about doing the right thing. It's about feeling the weight of your actions in a way that can't be ignored or excused away. This wasn't revenge, no matter how much my mother tried to frame it that way when she told extended family I was punishing Ethan. Revenge is about inflicting pain for satisfaction. What I did was about restoring balance, about making sure the person who created the damage carried the cost instead of dumping it on me. There's a crucial difference between making someone hurt and making someone accountable, and I'd finally learned where that line was. Every dollar Ethan paid back, every credit report correction, every month of rebuilding what he'd destroyed, that was balance, not vengeance. The universe doesn't naturally correct injustices. People have to create equilibrium, and sometimes that means being willing to make others uncomfortable. Understanding that balance costs exactly what was broken was the most liberating and painful realization of my life. It meant accepting that some relationships would never be the same, that some people would always see me as the villain for refusing to keep paying their bills, literally and figuratively. But it also meant recognizing my own worth, understanding that protecting myself wasn't selfish or cruel, it was necessary. Love without consequences isn't actually love. It's permission to be careless with someone else's life, and I was done granting that permission. The cost of setting boundaries was high, but the cost of not setting them was everything I'd worked for, and I finally valued myself enough to choose differently. Looking back now, 18 months after that confrontation at my parents' dining table, I can see clearly what I couldn't see then. That learning to protect yourself is one of the most profound acts of self-love you'll ever commit. I learned that love without consequences doesn't strengthen bonds. It creates comfortable abuse where one person damages and the other endures, over and over, until there's nothing left to give. My relationship with my family will never be what it was, and honestly, I don't want it to be. What it was required me to be small, accommodating, and endlessly forgiving while receiving nothing in return. Documentation became my act of self-protection, my way of saying, I matter enough to defend, even if no one else will defend me. Every spreadsheet, every saved email, every printed statement was proof that I valued myself enough to fight for my future when the people who should have fought for me chose comfort instead. It wasn't cold or calculating. It was survival wrapped in organization, pain transformed into something actionable. I discovered that sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself is refuse to keep absorbing damage just to keep others comfortable, even when those others are family. And here's what nobody tells you about setting hard boundaries with people you love. It takes more strength than any act of forgiveness or accommodation ever will. Forgiving is passive. It asks nothing of the person who hurt you and everything of yourself. But accountability, real, documented, enforced accountability, demands courage because it shatters the illusion that keeping quiet is the same as keeping peace. I'm not the person I was before this happened, and that's not a loss. It's an evolution. I learned that protecting yourself, even when it costs you relationships, even when it makes you the villain in someone else's story, is still the right choice when the alternative is losing yourself completely. If you've ever been hurt by someone's "I didn't mean to," while they left you holding the bill, financial, emotional, or otherwise, this video was made for you. You're not dramatic for wanting accountability. You're not cruel for refusing to keep paying for someone else's mistakes, and you're not wrong for choosing yourself when everyone else chose comfort over your well-being. Hit that like button if this story resonated with you, because every like tells me there's someone else out there who needed to hear that their boundaries matter, and their pain is valid. Subscribe to this channel right now if you want more stories about finding strength in impossible situations, about choosing yourself even when it costs you everything familiar, and about the power of quiet, strategic self-protection. Turn on notifications because next week I'm sharing an even more intense story about what happened when I had to choose between my career and my family's expectations. And the choice I made shocked everyone, including myself. Your story matters, your boundaries matter, and you deserve people in your life who prove through their actions, not just their words, that they value you. After hearing everything I went through, I want to know, what would you have done in my place? Would you have documented everything like I did, or would you have handled it differently? And here's the deeper question. Do you believe that holding family accountable for real harm makes you disloyal? Or does loyalty mean protecting yourself when no one else will? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because I read every single one, and your perspective might help someone else who's struggling with the same impossible choice. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for being part of this community. I'll see you in the next video.